we are now in the last roundtable of this course today, talking about criminalization of migration and solidarity. This is a very central point of the last years of the European Union politics and the member states, and it's, for me, it's one of the key issues, of the key points in this moment, because to allow the violations of human rights, it's absolutely necessary for the states to avoid eye watches on the border. So for this point, the practice has been criminalizing migration and also criminalizing solidarity. So I think today we will have a very interesting roundtable, and we have in this sense very interesting presentators. I'd like to start apologizing Carlos, who has not been able to make the presentation. So I'm substituting him, and today, well, also we will start with also Mirkan Valpetek, Advocacy and Communication Coordinator of the NGO Lesbos Legal Center, about the situation in Greece. Later, Lucia Gennari, lawyer specialized in immigration and asylum law, a member of the Italian Association of Juridical Studies on Immigration, will speak about Italian situation. Well, I will introduce something about the Spanish situation. You meet me sometimes before. I'm Diego Boza from Asociación Pro Derechos Humanos de Andalucía, and also a law professor in the University of Cádiz. And at the last presentation will be done by Manon Luis, advocacy manager of the NGO Mobile Info Team in Greece, together with Hope Barker, senior policy analyst for the Border Violence Monitoring Network, in this also speaking about this point that, as I have just exposed, it's one of the key points now and also in the future, because this criminalization is allowing to build a speech that justify all the violation, all the vulneration of human rights of migrants. In this sense, I think we can start. I give the floor to Osa Mirkan Valpetek, talking about Greece. That Greece is, for me, Osa will expose that the main state doing this kind of policies. Osa, please.
Diego, thank you for this event, first of all, to everybody who organized it, and nice to see Manon, Lucia again. Also to all the participants. First of all, I'm very sorry. It's the first time that I'm attending to an event like this, so if anything goes technically wrong, please excuse my boomerness on this matter. But if you allow me now, I will try to share my presentation, maybe to do it a bit more interactive. Yes, okay. So, like Diego mentioned, I'm assuming most people have also been here on Tuesday when my great colleague Lorraine was actually doing a presentation. So I will cut the chase about what, in terms of what we do, could be summarized into 4 categories. First one is that we are based in Lesbos Island, and we do provide free legal aid to migrants throughout their whole asylum procedures. The second part is conducting strategic litigation, especially carrying violation of human rights for certain specific cases to supranational bodies like ECTHR, the European Court of Human Rights, or actually picking up specific criminalized cases like migrants being accused of smuggling and boat driving, as we call it, like being the captain of the ship and being charged for 50+ years often. The fourth part is documenting and reporting about the work that we do or the analysis that we create through the litigation of our cases. And fourth is the political advocacy that we try to vocalize. I'm sure Manon will also get into the depth of it as well as we go on, about pushbacks and border violence practices, or in general, access of migrants to services or to protection in general. So this is somehow the body of our work. I mean, I'm quite sure you are quite familiar with the routes, etc. I just put it here to give a bit of an orientation to people who might not be very familiar about where we are stationed at. So the eastern route that you're seeing from Turkey towards the inlands of Europe, plus the one that takes you towards Greece, is the main entry points that we often consider when it comes to entry to Greece. The eastern route for Eastern Mediterranean basin. The main matter when it comes to criminalizing migrants and people who are in solidarity with migrants is one specific area that considers the anti-smuggling law. I'm no legal expert myself. Maybe it would be nice to hear the rest of the people, how they were like combined, for instance, the policies in Italy and Spain, to hear more about like the similarities of the matter. But the nature of the body, the nature of the law that affects these criminalization matters, in Greece at least, are often coming from the vagueness of the laws and the undefined nature of certain articles that could be broadened up to punish people, specifically with political motives, unfortunately. And beyond that, because of this vagueness, smuggling charges are often extended or widened into a criminal organization charge, say being accused of being a smuggling network, etc. So this lack of definition or deliberate gaps within the law itself is actually the main tool that has been utilized in Greece. Another part of the discrepancy that takes place is the separation in EU law and UN law, that certain gaps, that discrepancy, that exists between, where when UN defines the smuggling within the law, the main purpose that they try to establish the law with is actually to protect the people on the move. However, their definition goes as, and I quote, order to obtain directly or indirectly financial or other material benefit. So this is the law that affects people who are supposedly arriving to the island or arriving to Greece by sea and being charged of smuggling, thus being criminalized through it. Because in here, the article follows as directly or indirectly having a financial or other material benefit. At the same time, the discrepancy with EU facilitators package on this matter is actually deleted this part in 2002. So that automatically brought us to a level that whoever enters to Greek territory can actually be charged on very broad terms about being a smuggler. And in our very specific case, it's often the migrants who are riding or operating the engine of the boat, because smugglers who are very well aware of this law do not accompany the people, especially when they're arriving to Lesbos. Thus, every small boat that arrives to the island often ends up giving one or two people a criminal sentence that could be quite outrageous in terms of years. To give it a bit more legal details, in 2014, like also localizing in Greece, 2014 was the year when the EU directive regarding anti-smuggling law has actually been enacted in Greece. And the discrepancy that this matter not involving having a financial or material benefit have been excluded, actually ended up migrants being charged with 10 plus some extra years per person being carried on the boat as well. The sentences often change per person part, at least of it, due to the aggravated or mitigating effects. So, for instance, aggravating effects per person could be if supposedly there has been a life-threatening effect on somebody else, or it could be that you actually got material benefit or financial benefit of it. So because of this, compared to other countries, the application, at least the first sentences in Greece, are actually quite high. We're talking by average 55 plus years. To move on again about the aftermath of events, is that migrants are often being treated to courts that takes no more than 45 minutes, 10 to 45 minutes to be exact. And the only testimonies that have been given against them are often given by either the Coast Guard or the police, and on very, very vague terms. And unfortunately, often without evidence as well, because photography or video is very hard to obtain in these moments, or deliberately are gone. Thus, the whole sentence is actually being carried out by the official authorities, such as police and Coast Guard, and sometimes also Frontex themselves, and their testimonies. At the same time, statistically, the jail population of Greece, about 50% of it is migrant origin. So 50% of the jail population either has been or still is a migrant in Greece. And about 20% of the whole population are being charged with smuggling allegations. And the big body of that smuggling group is actually the captains, the boat drivers method that I was just mentioning about. The person who's operating the engine of the boat gets to be charged as a human smuggler and gets a sentence accordingly, even though that he is basically a migrant himself. We can go into the details of the law and the extension of it maybe in the Q&A. So I will skip those parts for later on. For people who have more in-depth questions, please feel free to ask it on the Q&A part. Again, speaking of like localization, one thing that is also important in terms of like creating a political narrative, at least in Lesbos, is also EU-Turkey deal, and how EU-Turkey deal actually created hotspot islands within Aegean Sea. As you can see, the islands that I have circled in red, starting on the north part, Lesbos, and goes on, are these hotspot islands where the migrants can arrive, can have to be held in a reception and identification center, aka a camp, and have to go through their whole asylum procedure here, thus are not allowed to neither leave the island, and often cases not even leave the camp, or leave the camp only on specific occasions. So again, given a sense of orientation, please try to see the distance between Athens and Lesbos, Athens being the capital city, and Turkey and Lesbos. And again, like moving on with the same thing, the trouble that hotspot islands also pose is, I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with, is that how they create a detention within detention, or deterrence within deterrence. So migrants who are often ending up in these camps are not being able to access specific services as well, and thus also forced often to act criminally, in quotations, by illegally trying to leave the island in order to have access to other means, either movement or even healthcare. Some facilities, such as hospitals, are not very well stated in these islands because they often serve supposedly to a smaller population. Thus, the facilities, say for complex surgeries, etc., cannot be taking place in the Lesbos, and the transport procedures can actually end up with very failing efforts, costing life also.
Ozan, sorry, can I just interrupt? I don't think your presentation's running. There's been some comments that it's still stuck on the first slide.
Okay, is it maybe, oh, sorry. Okay, are we seeing maybe a different picture now, or is it still stuck?
No, it's
Oh,
still
no.
stuck.
No, it's the same.
Whoa, sorry. Again, thanks for jumping in, Manuel. I wouldn't have gone for it otherwise. Do not know how to correct it though, I must say, because it's moving for me. Give me a second.
Yeah, now it's changing.
Okay, how about now? Again, switching. How about now?
Can you open all the screen?
I think this is the whole screen, but I think you see this, but not the rest of the part, huh? When I turn it into a slide, I think it goes off.
Yeah, make
Yeah.
this the presentation.
Okay, do you mind if I continue this way? Can everybody see it this way? I think.
Sure.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, okay.
So these are two important cases when we talk about like criminalization of people on the move. On the left, you see one case that we were also representing, the Moria 2 case, where two minors, both under 18, have been accused of burning down the infamous Moria camp in 2002. Unfortunately, both the cases are still on appeal court, but in jail. And somehow, due to police testimonies and some hidden testimonies, two kids were actually identified out of almost 20,000 people to be sole responsible of this fire. And on the side, which somehow very last Thursday actually we got the good news of, is the infamous case of two boat drivers, Amir and Razuli, who have been in jail for two and a half years approximately, and have been charged for more than 50 years. Good news is that by the time that we were preparing this presentation, the court was still ongoing, but it was seen on Thursday, and both of the people are released. One found innocent, and the other one have been charged with 8 years, but then the charge has been dropped and he was somehow released. So again, like two main things that we try to identify is that as an organization, we do not take criminal cases, but if they are charged as criminal cases with a political motive behind it to definitely deter migrants themselves, these are cases that we try to either represent or try to follow and give support to. And these two campaigns have been organized by a very wide international community. And hopefully the same success that we saw, success in quotations that is, will also be applied to the two minors that we represent for Moria 2. So another aspect of criminalization, of course, is this period of unknown waiting, either within the camp or within the prison during your sentence or your pretrial detention. You can, often the testimonies that we do get involves torture-like activities and definitely lack of access to services within prison sentence or pre-trial detention. The deliberate cases that actually been removed from one island to the other. What I mean is, to give an example, Lesbos does not have a prison in itself. So people who have been charged by these crimes in Lesbos have to be removed to kilometers away and have to be brought back to the island constantly. And this trouble can take up to days, where their detention conditions actually worsen and cannot be reported. They become completely invisible. Healthcare, and above all, mental health care, is definitely an issue. We do have quite a bit of problem that not in being able to have the same client as we have find before the pretrial detention part starts. As I mentioned before, the trials are often too short with very specific people who are testimonying against it, and with often lack of evidence. So it's also like a systematic body of criminalization that follows it afterwards. When it comes to an effect that also embraces Lesbos Island and many islands that are close to the border of Greece, is also a heavy load of militarization. What we call sometimes, maybe Manoni will also get into this ping pong effect of like two countries pushing migrants back and forth several times, have something that we have witnessed in this island quite often. However, not anymore as frequently, because now often the Greek Coast Guard or Frontex, when they push people back, they've been picked up by Turkish Coast Guard, and the Turkish state and the Coast Guard itself actually is using this method as a great tool of documentation to prove the international human rights violations that Greece is conducting. So for Turkey's state policy, it was also that manipulating or weaponizing migrants twice, once by their departure or somehow allowing them the space to depart from Turkey in very unsafe conditions, and by also receiving them again, without mentioning how migrants in Turkey are being treated at all. And plus, civil society organizations specifically working on rescue are completely banned from the island, and they were actually been violently attacked in the past before as either as organizations or NGOs themselves. I'm sure like one case that you're very familiar with is the is the Sea-Watch case, and also some other court cases that Aegean Boat Report, which is one of our like main source of information when it comes to this representation and evidence-based advocacy about pushbacks. And on 10th of January, actually, we're expecting another huge court case that have been going on since 2018. Long story short, the same laws that applied to criminalize people on the move are actually being used also against people in solidarity, working on sea rescue or documentation or monitoring. So it's also a double-edged sword. It's like one should not neglect the other. Thus, often political movements or advocacy around this matter is done by both groups at the same time without separation. Migrants or people on the move are often trying to act together with people who are often approaching in solidarity or sea rescue missions, etc., about these court cases. Of course, like when we're speaking about this, again, I might skip certain stuff thinking that you are aware of it or it's a given. So feel free to engage whenever you feel that a term is not very familiar with it. But what we call pushbacks is something that we very aggressively deal with in Lesbos. On the left, you can see a great work of forensic architecture that just came out very recently and also online available in their website, that they have mapped and geolocated and reorganized all the existing and reported pushback events that have taken place in Greece, both in sea and land. And if you can see full report, you can see the intensification of events that are taking place in and around Lesbos so aggressively. One reason of this is because the border have been an entry point for many years before, but at the same time, due to the nature of the militarized facts about these both land masses, it's actually often more easier to reach to a report or a case that could be followed later on. On the right, you do see an actual photo that have been taken roughly a month ago by MSF, Medicines Sans Frontières, in the island, where when they conduct an emergency medical aid to a group who have reached to them and stated that they're in the island there and they're afraid to be hunted and pushed back, MSF sent a van of medical experts to the region to find them and to provide them medical aid on the spot. Due to the fact that they had 2 pregnant women and one of them was in much pain, they ended up finding people in handcuffs as such and no one around them. So the fact that these people are constantly being hunted on the island, on the soil, even if they arrive, is also a big fact. And we are trying to work how much we can document this without harming the people who are already been under this, went through this process in the first place, and also the people who work around them. Another thing to mention for sure is that on the left, you see a huge complex of buildings in Athens that are called Prosfigika. It's a social space that have been squatted for many, many years and have been occupied and actually hosted by a lot of migrants and migrant families. Same place have been raided by the Greek authorities and the police by helicopters in the past weeks and tried to be evicted somehow, where 79 people got arrested, one of them with like legal charges. So while this is happening in the island, the general Greek discourse is also going through a very hard, almost on a crackdown level against migrants and people who are in solidarity with migrants at the same time, not on a level of entry point, but as a wider policy. On the right, you'll see a bit of like the new fake news law. I'm sure Mobile Info team will get into it, so I'm leaving that part a little bit to the side. What I want to mention with this, unfortunately, on Tuesday, again, to give you a climate of what's happening when it comes to state crackdown in Greece. On Tuesday, unfortunately, a Romani citizen, Kostas Filigouris, have been murdered by the police because he was shot in the head by police officers due to the claim that he stole gasoline from a petrol station that was costed 20 euros. After, I think the next day, the parliament have voted for a law to increase the monthly wage of police officers in Greece, 600 euros more, and almost all of the parties except one jointly agreed on this, including the left parties. So there is also almost a rewarding system that crackdown towards marginalized groups, from people on the move to Romani, etc., with that racist narrative, is also being awarded in Greece somehow. Again, when it comes to some sort of a pushback method, what you see on the right is also have been utilized quite often, putting people into these dinghies with no sails or no engine and pushing them by waves in order to be picked up by Coast Guard of Turkey. How we try to engage with it is a process, an arbitrary term that we came up with that we call emergency legal aid, where we have an emergency number, and if people are able to contact us or other organizations informing that there is a landing that took place in the island, we try to engage a coordinated effort to reach to those people before the entities who can push them back. We are right now discussing about if we can physically be there. So far we haven't been, but we do have a partnership system together with MSF and some other organizations, but we still have to do it by the book. And by the book has to go through that. If we do not inform the authorities first, but instead act on our own, the same criminal charges probably will be applied upon us, including smuggling networks and human trafficking, etc. Thus, we operate in a way where we inform the authorities, being the port police, UNHCR, the public prosecutors, and the police, about the arrival and the coordination of the people, and then we guided this information to MSF, where they send vans in order to reach to those people to provide medical aid. So, and this again is going on a very sad race, where the more weapons that we develop to deter these pushback events, the more harsher the state gets. To give you an example, when we come up with this legal aid, the emergency legal aid scheme, together with the medical aid part with MSF, recent days, MSF started to be stopped by a random paperwork check in their vans, and actually have been stopped not to reach the space of the landing. Thus, they start to send two vans from two different routes. Now, two vans are being stopped, etc. So there's also this back and forth legal exploitation of the framework constantly that we also try to combat. At the same time, within the island and outside of the island, there are a lot of political response that are growing that we try to partake or try to somehow give space to also. And I would like to underline here that these responses are often done jointly together with people who are either citizens or locals, along with people on the move. So it's not happening separately, which gives enough of space for a political discourse to be also initiated. And the intersectionality of things also, when you think about the event on the right that is upcoming in Athens, that it's about evictions of SD houses, which is hosting migrants, but at the same time about gentrification is also very noteworthy in terms of giving us more space to work. And finally, like I said from the start, the release of Amir and Razuli and the code, at least the sentence of this case, the end of this case, actually bear the potential of being an exemplary case for 2,000 more court cases that are either waiting or about to be proceeded. And actually, all of the people who are under charge are under pre-trial detention, could potentially benefit from this method. And this was a very long-lasting campaign that we were a part of, not the only organizer of. And these probably court cases as similar can actually prove potentially the abandonment or reconstruction of this law, which is also systemically that we try to fight for. So thank you for listening. I hope I didn't get overboard and tire you with the technological shortcomings of mine. So I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the people.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ozan, for your presentation. It's very interesting, and also I would like to underline this last point, that identifying everything with smuggling, the real smugglers are free. So this is a very important point for our experience also in Spain and also in Greece, and these three dimensions of the problem, vulnerating human rights, criminalizing NGOs, and also criminalizing also the migrants. So, well, I will not extend because we are in time. So I will give the floor to Lucia Gennari, so to explain the situation in Italy. Please, Lucia.
Hello, thanks also from my part for the invitation and for organizing. So I will try to provide a broader overview, but then focus more on criminalization of search and rescue NGOs, which is more the topic I know more. But of course, this is not the only problematic issue concerning criminalization of migration and acts of solidarity toward people on the move in Italy. We can trace, at least if we think about this last, let's say, wave of criminalization, we can start or find a kind of starting point in 2015-16, after the so-called refugee crisis, which hit not only the Turkish-Greek route, but also the Central Mediterranean one. And even before with the Arab Springs and uprisings in Italy, we had, let's say, two main moments of large arrivals via sea to Italy, of people coming from Tunisia or Libya mainly. These moments were crucial also for the development of migration policies and the policies that were in contrast or trying to manage migrations to Italy on a European level, as we all know, but also on an Italian one. This is something that let's say affected both the administrative way of managing migration and also the attitude of criminal law enforcers, actors, and in particularly the police, the judge, the judiciary system. And we saw a big change for what concerns, for example, criminalization, first of all, of people on the move, arriving via sea, as I said, in Italy, because there was, after 2013, so a couple of years after the Arab Springs, a specific attention to this figure that is commonly called in Italian scafista, in English boat drivers we can translate, but I think in Italian it has a specifically negative meaning. And there was a shift in the way investigations were held concerned towards people who were allegedly driving or having tools for navigation on the boat with which they arrived to Italy. And this is particularly true after a moment which is also crucial in our history, let's say, which consists in two very big ship and well-known shipwrecks in 2013 in October. One was very close to Lampedusa, and another one was instead in between Sicily and Malta, where hundreds of people lost their lives. And in both situations, there were probably Italian responsibilities for not intervening in time while this was possible. Recently, a very long court case was unfortunately closed with no decision because too much time had passed, and it was about establishing the responsibility of the Italian authorities, and in particular the Coast Guard, for one of these two shipwrecks, the one which happened on the 11th of October 2013, where basically the Italian authority actively decided not to send an Italian military vessel which was nearby in order to rescue the people in danger. And they only arrived when already most of them had died. So this is a moment where the reaction from authorities was both to pushed by the public opinion to intervene in rescuing people at sea by launching this military operation called Mare Nostrum, but also when there was this decision of tackling smuggling in a different way, and in particularly using the anti-mafia tools, which entail a massive use of very invasive way of investigation, like phone tapping and ambiental tapping and undercover police and so on, investing a lot of resources, economical and human resources, but also the possibility to apply precautionary measures in a very heavy way. And this impacted a lot, especially on the people on the move, which were targeted as smugglers because of the fact that they were considered the drivers, the captains of these boats. And since 2018 until 2021, more than 2,500 people were involved in this kind of investigation, while condemns, it's a bit hard to establish how many they were in this time. But anyway, a very, very smaller number, despite the fact that basically all of these people undergone through they were targeted by precautionary measures and pre-trial detention, basically, for a long time. This is something that marks a difference when people with EU citizenship is targeted for acting in solidarity or anyway submitted to investigation for the same crime, which is of course aiding and abetting irregular migration. And we can see that in particular when we examine the way European activists are treated when it comes to this kind of criminalization. Before going into this this part of my intervention, I wanted also to underline that if it's true that the crime of aiding and abetting irregular migration is the main tool used in criminalization of both migration and solidarity towards migration, a lot of other kind of tools are in place in different kind of scenarios. So, for example, after 2015, also a lot of actions, solidarity actions made both by activists, European activists, or migrant communities themselves were targeted in different ways. For example, a very, very let's say lively moment for this kind of actions against migrants and then transit was happening in 2015 and 17, when a lot of people were still able to transit through Italy, and then arriving in Italy without being properly identified by the Italian authorities, who back then tried to a bit escape the application of Dublin regulation by not identifying well, or not identifying at all people who were coming through the Mediterranean route. And this led, as you probably know, to a lot of people passing through Italian cities and going then to France, Austria, Germany, and then also in other northern countries. This led to the creation of situations that were targeted by the police and the local administrations in different ways. So, for example, a very known example is the one of Ventimiglia. In this city, a lot of people were transiting to go to cross the border with France. And there were informal camps where people just stayed some days or before crossing, or when they were brought back by the French police. And in this situation, in this context, the police attitude was something, and is still today, something very clearly, let's say, abusive, and this behavior is made of different kind of actions that go through racial profiling in the train stations, but also just continuous identification of activists and migrants, but also, for example, continuous search in places like rooms that are used for providing legal support. There were, I mean, there are a lot of also administrative measures that can be and are taken by different kind of authorities that are meaningful in this context. To go on in time, 2016-17 instead marks the moment where search and rescue activity held by civil society started to be targeted after years where it was considered a very, very nice activity to be held, and rescuers were called in the public discourse angels of the sea, and I very quickly became the taxi drivers of the sea, when there was this turning point that was marked by at least a couple of tendencies coming from the government that was in place back then, which was, it's important to remind, a center-left government that actually started two important tendencies. One was the construction of a very solid relation with the so-called Libyan authorities, marked by the signing of the Italy-Libya Memorandum of Understanding on Management of Migration. That is the base, the legal base, let's say, of all the subsequent actions made by Italy in support of the Libyan Coast Guard and in general Libyan authorities, with the aim of preventing people from leaving Libya or then bringing them back if they manage to escape on the boats. And of course, this is something that's possible because of the European support and the introduction of the so-called Code of Conduct for Search and Rescue NGOs. That started to change a bit the narrative towards search and rescue at sea by NGOs, or anyway civil society. There were public declarations by a public prosecutor of a Sicilian court in Catania, Zuccaro, and he said publicly that he had evidences of the connection between smugglers and NGOs. So this is the base where then that then led to the opening of around 12 investigations. Now it's getting more, because now we have again a moment of big conflict around search and rescue and NGOs. And this was based around the conviction or idea that NGOs were having some appointment in specific parts of the Mediterranean with so-called smugglers and were organizing the transfer. But even though this was not the case, and this was the object of only one still ongoing trial, which is the one against Juventa, MSF, and Save the Children, because all the rest, apart from one, which is more recent, have been closed with investigation dismissed or with the total declaration of non-guiltiness. So the point was also to try to establish the possibility to punish this activity also without having the need of proving that there was indeed a correlation, a connection, or an agreement with smugglers in Libya or in Tunisia. But this has never been the case. On thanks to the application of the excusation clauses. Sorry, I don't remember now the word, but like it's circumstances that don't allow the application of a punishment, even though the fact is committed. Like, for example, the acting in self-defense or in a state of necessity, or exercising a right, or complying with a duty. So this is the main tool that has been used in trials to establish the legitimacy of the action of rescuing people at sea. This the fact that the tool used to criminalize this activity is again aiding and abetting irregular migration, like it is for the so-called boat drivers or people who act in support of or provide assistance to people at the borders in the north of Italy, is always the crime of aiding and abetting smuggling. Is not a case, but it's a result of the structure of this crime. As Ozan was saying before, for Greece, we have a similar problem in Italy, that is that the behavior punished by this crime is not really well defined, and includes very generic actions such as transporting someone, but also committing any other action which is directed at aiding the irregular crossing of the border towards Italy or towards another state, or just staying the irregular permanence in Italy. Plus the fact that benefits are not needed to be able to prosecute someone for this crime. It's just something that makes the sanction harder, but can also not be there. And the fact that an action is done for humanitarian or assistance purposes is only valid if the action is committed in Italy, on the territory. So that's why it's not applicable for the cases of search and rescue operations or any kind of action that happens on the other side of the border. So it's the structure itself of the crime that makes it so useful in a way for targeting many different activities, even the more clearly, let's say, if possible, humanitarian ones. I have 5 minutes, or do I have I don't know, because I don't remember.
Yes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So then just to give you an overview of how things developed from 2017. As I said, there had been at least 12 cases of criminalization of search and rescue activities by civil actors. None of them, for example, is about activities held by merchant vessels. Merchant vessels are luckily a crucial actor for rescuing lives at sea in the Mediterranean. Luckily, they have never been targeted so far as I know. This is different for fishermen, for example, but big companies have never been targeted, even though, and this is a peculiar and already still ongoing case. So we have two now. One is the one that I mentioned before pending in Trapani against the Juventa crew, Save the Children and MSF. Another one is against another NGO, which is not really an NGO, but like an organization of civil society called Mediterranea. This is a peculiar case, which is maybe interesting to know about. It's pending in front of the Tribunal of Ragusa in Sicily, and it's about the action of rescuing a very small group of people, 27 people, if I'm not wrong, that were previously rescued by a big tug ship from the very big shipping company Maersk. You probably know for the So they rescued this small group of people in the Maltese search and rescue region, and Malta didn't allow them to disembark for 38 days. And this, of course, led to very, very serious consequences on the people who were rescued. Some of them jumped from the ship. It is very, very tall, and there were people in very serious health conditions. They were then transferred on the Mare Ionio, Mediterranean ship, after they assessed their medical conditions, and then they could disembark in Italy. After that, the public prosecutor in Ragusa opened the case, especially because Maersk made a donation after that to the NGO, and this was considered as basically immoral, because, as we said, the fact of having or not having benefit, it's something that made the thing, the sanction harder, but it's not necessary to commit a crime. But also what is interesting to know is that the Maersk Etienne, which would be a part of this smuggling agreement, has never been targeted by the prosecutors. So this is also about just maybe a curiosity, but it's something that tells a lot about the attitude of even the judiciary towards this activity. And I think I can stop, and I hope that I give you a bit of an overview.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucia, for your presentation. So it's very interesting listening to the situation in Greece and Italy. Now I will explain a little. I will do it very, very quickly to have time to listen to the presentation of Manon and Hope, and also to have time to make some questions, to answer to some questions, because I think it's a very important issue. So comparing situation in Spain, we can say that it's almost perfect listening to the situation in Greece and Italy, but it's not true. We have some problems, but in a very low intensity than in Greece, in France even, and in Italy. Also, of course, the facilitation package is in our criminal code. So for me, it's a sleeping giant. So there is the possibility to make it in use in the future, but it's not now. Also, in the very beginning, we have to say that in Spain, irregular migration, it's not a crime. So it's not irregular migrants are not criminals in this sense. So against them, we don't use criminal law. We use administrative law and with the guarantees, and it's a little bit different situation. So we have some experiences of that. So misusing some kind of criminal elements, of criminal instruments, criminal tools to focus on migrants. For example, is the situation of migrant that jumped the fence of Ceuta and entered into the city, were charged by public disturbs. So it's not because they hit the involuntary. They hit the policeman that tried to avoid that they entered into Ceuta. So and they were charged and they were deported quickly because this situation. So also, for example, in Spain, it's very important the situation of boat drivers. So because most of migrants arriving irregularly to Spain arrives by boat, and the situation is that police, that public prosecutor, that judge also try to focus on one or two of the migrants that were on the boat, and always there is there are criminal charges against one of two of them for being boat drivers, even when there are very weak proofs. So this is a very important point because they do not present proofs. Even a photo, it's very interesting, the role of Frontex, using photos from Frontex to prove that a person drove the boat. So this is an experience that we are living here in Spain in some cases. Also, for for me, the most important point in Spain, we can say that it's related to the narratives. So here the narrative is considering that irregular migration is always linked to mafias, to this kind of criminal groups. Also the left government, the center left government that is in Spain uses this kind of speeches, also always focusing on the idea that irregular migration is led by mafias. So this is a very important point in several elements. When they use this argument, migrants became the result of a criminal activity. So avoiding migrants arriving in Spain, it's avoiding a criminal operation. So with this narrative, they can do everything to avoid that. So in the same sense that when mafias try to enter drugs or other kind of cocaine to Spain, they have to do everything to avoid that. Well, the same thing speaking about migrants, forgetting that we are talking about people, about human beings. So these kind of operations are presented as fighting against migrations, against irregular migrants, against mafias. So it's very important. For example, on June, there was a very, very hard operation developed by the Moroccan authorities, also with the cooperation of Spanish authorities, that became the death of more than 24 migrants in Melilla. And Spanish Minister of the Interior said that that was an operation against mafias. So against mafias, you can also make use the violence, even when this violence lead to 24 deaths, 24 people died. So this is a very tricky argument, because we are identifying human beings with products of criminal activities. So this is the first point for me, very important, why we are trying to fight against this kind of narratives. Also because they are not real, and also this is very interesting that Ozan said before, if everything is mafia, nothing is mafia. So this is a very important point. I'm sure that mafias are working with migrants because it's a lucrative business. This is a very there are a lot of people that need to come to Spain, and they can that these groups can use that to get money, to take money. But the fact is that we have never seen that Moroccan policeman or Spanish policeman that charge for 20, 30 people in the origin for being a criminal group. They are only focused on people driving the boat. They're not where is the leader of these groups? Where is the capo of these mafias? Why they can't find never? They can never find these positions, these powerful man. So for me, this is a very important point in the sense of fighting against this speech. Always in Spain, there is the article 318 bis of the criminal code. That is the smuggling article, more or less. But if you read the judgments, the sentences about the decisions about that, you can say that always one or two people shared by this article. So if we are talking about mafias, where are groups of 10, 15, 20 people organizing this kind of structure, organizing this kind of troubles? That so mafias is a fake speech to focus on migrants and to avoid migrants, and also to justify every act against migrants, against people. So this is now our main point, because it's not Spain that is doing that, it's Morocco. So we have given the control of our border to Morocco. So it's they are developing policies very, very vulnerating in a very, very hard way human rights. And Spain that gives the budget, give the money, the European money, of course, to Morocco, justify that, speaking about criminal groups, about mafia. So this structure, it is very important in our narrative, and we must fight against that. It's true that it's not the same that in Greece the situation is worse, also in Italy, but for us I think it's common this speech speaking about smugglers, about organizations that help smugglers and that, but they never find the real smugglers. They only find people driving boats that in most of the cases are migrants that have only drive the boat to avoid die, because nobody can drive the boat, so somebody must to take the boat, or they have the travel free or some kind of benefits, but they are not real an element of a mafia in the sense of belonging an organization. So they're also victims. But the answer of the Spanish system, I think the European system, is the criminalizing them and putting them into the jail, also to build a narrative of making migration, irregular migration in this sense, a crime. So sorry, but I think I have a problem with the light. So well, it's the only thing I have to do about the Spanish system. So I will now I will give the floor to Manon and Hope, and I will try to recover my light in my room. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego. Manon, can you hear? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Hope, are you okay to share the presentation?
Can you see it?
Yes, right now.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so Manon and I will present together as Mobile Info Team and the Border Violence Monitoring Net. So we'll just start out with a small introduction of who we are. So first of all, the Border Violence Monitoring Network is a network of 14 different organizations active all the way from Greece to Austria along the so-called Balkan route, and became active in 2016 when several NGOs began witnessing violent pushbacks at Hungarian and Croatian borders. They established a common framework and methodology for recording testimonies of that violence, and all of those are then published in our online open source database, where we have over 1,600 testimonies now since 2016. We also publish monthly reports to analyze emergent trends and patterns, as well as accounts of escalating violence, excessive use of force, cases of alleged torture, and other key issues. And we do special reports on key trends that warrant further analysis. So we do reports on internal violence from within state interiors, the phenomenon of criminalization. When we have video evidence of violations, we do visual analyses. And then basically these testimonies form the basis for our multi-jurisdictional advocacy. So on the national level, we do cases at national administrative courts. We do reports and complaints to ombudspersons. We engage with national human rights institutions. At the UN level, we engage with special procedures and universal periodic reviews. And at the EU level, we do briefings for MEPs. We lobby for legislative change and amendments to key documents. And I'll pass to Manon to explain about Mobile Info Team.
So Mobile Info Team is one of BVMN's member organizations. So we participate in testimony collection and also in monthly reports and other special reports and general advocacy. But Mobile Info Team is based in northern Greece, in Thessaloniki. It was established in 2016 after kind of recognizing the lack of information regarding asylum procedures. However, now we kind of work mostly online. So we work on hotlines on WhatsApp and Facebook, with caseworkers to kind of provide a more tailored response to inquiries around asylum procedures, documentation, family reunification, detention, etc. So we operate in 6 languages and we respond to around 600 inquiries per month, and also take specific cases in further depth with legal representation. This kind of means that we have a huge database of casework which can be used to really focus on research topics and advocacy centered around the kind of current and updated issues that people are facing regarding the asylum procedure.
So our presentation, first of all, we'll do like a very brief introduction to the general context, and then we'll go into more the Greek context and changes of law specifically around criminalization, and then we'll present a case study on islets that's like quite specific on this topic. So first of all, for the general context introduction, I'm going to try and be brief but cover everything, but there's basically 2 key terms that we'll go into, which is securitization and the phenomenon of crimmigration. So to put all of that in context, these things will come up. But if we go all the way to the back to the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, we saw this like renewed commitment to the European project with the Single European Act in 1992 to try and complete the creation of an internal market and a system of free internal movement of goods, but also of people. And this was initiated by the Schengen Acquis. And it was kind of presented that a byproduct of this internal area of free movement was the necessity of the strengthening of the EU's external borders to protect this internal free market movement system. And this kind of set the stage for the Amsterdam Treaty of 1997, which birthed the idea of a common European asylum system. And this is when member states initially came together to say, you know, we need this common system so that all of our procedures are aligned. And also there was this delegation of power to the EU in order to align these procedures, which came out with the Common European Asylum System, which is 6 legislative instruments to establish minimum standards for asylum. So this is kind of a very brief introduction, and then we kind of introduce the concept of securitization. So securitization is like a very key term when it comes to criminalization. So policymakers kind of use securitization to attract more resources and to legitimize their position as caretakers of the state. And so certain groups become scapegoats for societal ills like a lack of employment or increased crime rates. And then this reinforces the role of political actors as protectors of society at large. So migration became a threat that was linked to security concerns. And we see this really accelerating in 9/11, in 2001 with the 9/11 bombings. And just after this, you know, there was the US declaring a war on terror, but at the same time, there was a meeting of the Justice and Home Affairs Council at the EU that called for an urgent examination of the balancing act between safeguarding internal security and complying with international protection mandates for asylum seekers. And just as the US declared a war on terror, the Spanish presidency of the European Council in 2002 declared a war on illegal migration. So there was this rhetorical linking of security issues and illegal migration that then by the time we hit the 2015 so-called crisis, where 1.3 million individuals sought asylum in Europe, we get to this phenomenon of crimmigration, which is an academic term that describes the overlap between criminal law and migration management that leads to the illegalization of movement. And basically securitization is seen as a precursor to the act of criminalization of movement. And there's kind of 3 mutually reinforcing processes in this. So there's the rhetorical, where people on the move are constructed as threats by their management being shifted into a security framework rather than a protection one. Then you have direct criminalization, which is when criminal law offenses have been inserted into immigration law, as lots of people have recounted today in terms of boat drivers, for example. And then you have procedural crimmigration. And this is when people on the move become criminal by definition, simply for the act of movement. arriving. And this is kind of the immigration crisis as we see it. So this is kind of what really happened from 2015 onwards, is that the European response to migration management had shifted to this idea of managing irregular people on the move, rhetoric of smugglers, of bogus asylum seekers, of illegal crossings, illegal movement. So there was this framing of illegality, which meant that the response to the influx of movement into the union, it was legitimized to react with violence and to try and stop that movement with violence as it was deemed as criminal. So then we kind of start to see the process of reborderization. First of all, Hungary erecting this 4-meter tall and 175-kilometer long fence with Serbia, and a number of other measures to guard the border. So electronic sensors, electric wire, helicopters, drone patrols, etc. And then by October 2015, there was a second border fence completed along the border with Croatia. And then by March 2016, within several days of each other, you see Macedonia, Croatia, and Slovenia all announcing the closure of their frontiers to people on the move, with this formal closure of the humanitarian corridor that had facilitated movement in a semi-regularized way. And so this securitization of borders was supported by this framing of all people entering the union as illegal and their movement as illegal and them as criminals. And then this led to kind of the violent pushback practices that started to proliferate along these borders, whereby people were being arbitrarily detained, being beaten, being tortured in different ways, and then being illegally pushed back without their asylum claims assessed because they were deemed as threats or as illegal people. And this only came up more in the COVID-19 pandemic, when people on the move were then deemed as threats both to public security, but also to public health. And at this time, we saw the movement of armed forces into migration management, so that this practice of criminalizing really reached a zenith in 2020. And since then, we've seen 250 cases of temporary border reintroduction since March 2020. So you can see how this phenomenon of securitization has led to crimmigration, which has then led to an acceptance of violence against people on the move. So this is a very brief introduction to how we got to where we are today, where specifically in the Greek context, which Manon will now go into, people on the move are inherently illegal, which justifies violence against them, but also justifies their subjection to criminal law proceedings.
Okay, so also to briefly go into the kind of context for Greece and especially the Greek government. Between 2015 and 2019, Syriza, the government, who are in general kind of centre-left, that's really not to say that there is nothing bad or wrong that they did. Pushbacks did also take place when they were in power. However, in 2019, there was a landslide victory for Nea Demokratia government, who are much more right-wing. And kind of immediately, there was some really increasingly restrictive migration policies implemented. So, for example, regarding the use of detention centres, again, kind of conflating people as criminals and keeping them in prison-like structures. Just to kind of say that obviously Ozan focused a lot on the island procedures and the kind of situation there. And we're going to focus on the mainland because actually there are quite a lot of differences in terms of kind of policy. The kind of context and hostile environment is the same, but it's just a bit of a difference in policies. So one of the other things that the government very quickly implemented in the International Protection Act was kind of restrictive asylum procedures and access to asylum procedures. However, in November 2021, the Skype pre-registration system was closed overnight, which really left a huge number of people undocumented and without access to accommodation, legal status, and medical care on the mainland. And then in kind of parallel to this, we also just saw a huge increase in laws to kind of restrict human rights groups, NGOs, journalists, and also activists. We just go on to the next slide, please, Hope. Thank you. In a very summarized way, these are just some of the changes to the law that have been implemented since the new government that really kind of pertain to criminalization and this real restrictive environment. So the first one was the Law on Deportations Amendment in 2021, which is about restricting search and rescue in the Aegean. So, of course, this is where pushbacks are taking place daily, and it's really reducing the visibility in terms of human rights monitoring. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion around kind of civil search and rescue, but this is something that cannot actually take place in Greece anymore. And then second is the NGO registry law. This was implemented in 2020. This is a kind of administrative barrier that was introduced for NGOs who are working within the field of migration and asylum. It's an extremely expensive and complex procedure, which makes it very difficult for small kind of grassroots organizations to function. And then one of the kind of big ones that we're going to focus on as well is the kind of dissemination of false news amendment, which introduced the fact that individuals can be charged with 5 years and financial penalties for spreading fake news, which kind of causes fear to the public. Really important to mention here is the fact that pushbacks are denied by the Greek government and can therefore be considered as fake news. In general, the kind of freedom of press in Greece is extremely limited. So this just kind of adds into the huge control of information. Next slide, sorry, Hope. So the next thing is also to kind of reinforce the fact that whilst there are more formal procedures for criminalization, there's also a lot of informal procedures for criminalization that make it a more and more restrictive environment for all kind of human rights defenders, especially related with migration. One of the, I kind of said a little bit about administrative barriers already, but also smear campaigns and defamation in the media. So for example, there's kind of the use of stating that an organization is being investigated, which really destroys the reputation of organizations locally and also internationally. This can kind of lead to a reduction of funding, material resources, and also just reputation and credibility. There's also been a huge number of surveillance and spyware used recently in Greece. This is kind of being investigated on a European level at the moment, especially with not only politicians, but also human rights groups and journalists. This is extremely high-tech surveillance, which is being used to monitor individuals, which is completely against the law. So yeah, this kind of environment, which really leads to an increasingly hostile and kind of focusing on like fear-mongering and reducing support locally and kind of pushing people out of the country. Okay, now we're going to focus on a very specific case study. So this is, again, away from the island kind of context and more to the mainland, the northern Greece context, which we've been working in a little bit more. So the land border between Greece and Turkey is the Evros region and is majoritarily made up of the Evros River. This is actually a very fast-flowing and deep and dangerous river, especially in the winter. And it's also a very kind of militarized and restricted zone, which means that the public have no access. And the Evros border has been a major entry point from Turkey, so especially with people coming from Syria and from Afghanistan. And something that we really started to see at the beginning of 2022, despite them already being used, was the use of islets in order to get into the country. So islets are kind of sandbanks in the middle of the river. There's sometimes vegetation on them. They vary in size. However, it's not always easy to cross the whole way to the Greek riverbank. And what we started to see was large groups, sometimes of over 100 people, including families, young children, extremely vulnerable people with medical vulnerabilities, who were stranded on the islets for kind of days and weeks without access to food, water, medical care. And especially in the winter, this is obviously, it gets extremely cold, but also in the summer, people are really prone to dehydration. And we saw a lot of kind of issues related to not having access to clean water. And what happened when these groups arrive on these islets and cannot cross to the Greek side, they would reach out to send kind of distress calls to police stations, UNHCR, Frontex, different NGOs across Greece in order to kind of ask for help and access to the territory, always expressing their will to claim asylum. And in response, some NGOs, because they don't have access to the area to directly support people, and failing to get a response from the authorities, began filing for applications for interim measures at the European Court of Human Rights, which requires the Greek authorities to provide immediate search and rescue operations and access to territory. So once the kind of application has been filed, and if it is a positive decision, the interim measure is then shared with the Greek authorities, so including border guard stations or police, again, kind of copying in Frontex and UNHCR. But often in response, there would either be no response or that the groups cannot be found. So despite having specific GPS coordinates for where people were located on these islets, there would constantly be a kind of, we don't know, we've looked for them, we can't find them response. Alternatively, something else we witnessed quite a lot was that the authorities would respond by saying that actually the groups are on Turkish territory and therefore the Turkish authorities should provide rescue. This was something that I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail in later. But in general, so since the beginning of 2022, there was around 20 cases that were granted interim measures. And despite this, despite it being Greece being legally bound to provide search and rescue, groups were most often pushed back to Turkey. So I think only a third of the groups got rescued. And often these were quite violent pushbacks. And again, this kind of ping pong between the two sides. So Greek authorities pushing people back to Turkey and then Turkish authorities pushing people back onto the islets. Which meant that it would kind of continue for sometimes a period of many weeks. And there has been records of people drowning in the river and also deaths due to a lack of medical care. So, for example, there was a woman who did not have access to dialysis and she had kidney failure and I think this was earlier this year and died on the islet. A very specific case that I am just going to go into, which took place in July, started in July this year and went into August. Very similar kind of pattern to what I've already described. And essentially, the group were granted positive interim measures. And there was a group of people in terms of journalists, researchers, and lawyers who attempted to kind of gain some visibility and public pressure in order to get the Greek authorities to respond, despite the fact that they were legally bound. And actually, this was a case that a huge amount of kind of international media picked it up. For example, Channel 4, BBC, Al Jazeera, Spiegel. And so there was a lot of kind of pressure outside of Greece as well and within European Parliament. This case was especially picked up because there was reports that a young girl had died on the islet just due to being bitten by a scorpion, and that there were many others in an incredibly vulnerable state, including pregnant women and elderly. And yet the authorities continued to respond that actually the group were on Turkish territory, which ended up leading to territorial disputes and an extensive effort to kind of map the 1926 borderline in order to establish that actually there was a good half of the islet that was Greek. And it's also important to remember that even within, the centimeters of the borderline, if there are people who are in distress and who want to claim asylum, they should have access granted to territory. And this kind of entire situation led to a huge amount of scrutiny from the government, from far-right groups, which Hope is going to go into a little bit more detail now in terms of the kind of criminalization of solidarity.
Sorry, struggling to unmute myself. Yeah, so basically this case unfolded and obviously had a large amount of attention. And this ended up leading to 4 kind of different interconnected points of criminalizations against the civil society actors and journalists working on this case. So first of all, the territorial dispute over this islet, in which the Greek government was saying that the islet was Turkish, which actually it was later revealed using the maps that the islet is of split sovereignty and the people were in fact on Greek territory at several points when they were asking for help. But this dispute over the territory of the islet, before it was proved and before the Greek government admitted that it was of split sovereignty, led to accusations of fake news and the spreading of false information. And so this kind of has built upon tendencies of the Greek government to control national media to spread these kinds of reports. So, for example, by deliberately distributing public funds to media agencies in their favor, this was a trend that began during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the government was giving out grants to help news agencies survive in that time, but only giving them to pro-government media agencies. And so in this case, there was kind of a dispute about the sovereignty of the islet, and it led to a Greek lawyer and politician tweeting that he was filing a lawsuit to Greece's Supreme Court against those who had fabricated and spread fake news about the sovereignty of the islet, which again kind of bolstered the allegations of the spreading of misinformation and strengthened online abuse against those who were working on this case. And then some days after this happened, some more sinister articles began circulating, which cited classified information they had been given that referred to an extremely fine-tuned apparatus that trades in desperate people and operates in cartel methods. And that was the civil society actors and journalists and lawyers who were working on the case. The article was saying that there were deeply forged connections between Turkish organized crime groups and at least 4 NGOs that was backed up by evidence from Greece's National Intelligence Agency, which later was subject to scandal for the spyware and the phone tapping that came out shortly afterwards. They also referred to one of the BVMN members' organizations, Mary Liberum, who have been subject to numerous criminalization attempts for their search and rescue operations. And then there was another article published in a right-wing paper that referred directly to BVMN as an NGO that facilitates the tracking of illegal migrants. So there was a direct smear campaign in the media against us. Then, just after this transit group had been taken to the reception center, another group reached out in distress from another islet, and BVMN filed interim measures again for this group. And the article basically used this to imply that BVMN is engaging in the strategic placing of transit groups onto islets to ensure that they are granted access to the territory and to destabilize the Greek state. So this has been obviously a direct attack again. Then again, as this case was unfolding, a partner of one of BVMN's key field operatives in the region who was speaking out against this case, but also has spoken out long-term against Greece, was subject to police harassment in northern Greece, where they had their phone confiscated, they were verbally assaulted, they were shouting at them. They were told it was a routine stop and search, but they were then strip searched, forced to a police station and detained for 45 minutes. When he complained about his treatment after being released, they laughed at him and told him to file a complaint. And actually, both he and the BVMN field operative chose to leave the country at that point. And then the reprisals by the Greek state continued even further. The Ministry of Migration and Asylum launched a direct attack at one of the journalists who was reporting on this, and said that basically the Minister of Interior, Mitarachi, released a statement accusing the journalists of secretly conducting interviews and claiming that they would take legal actions against him. So again, contributing to the fake news allegations, but also saying that they were going to submit evidence to the Supreme Court directly against the journalist who was reporting on this. So in this specific case, a number of people who are involved in the case are no longer in the country as a result. Human Rights 360, which was an NGO involved after pressure from the ministry, released a statement retracting all of their previous statements on the islet. Der Spiegel, after being also pressured by the Ministry of Interior, removed articles concerning the case from their website. And whilst this kind of smear campaigns, defamation and harassment in this way has been documented for a long time on the islands and with search and rescue missions, this was kind of the first landmark case of its time on the mainland, where we saw these kind of like informal criminalization procedures of defamation, of threats of lawsuits, and things like this really coming to the fore against our operatives. And what was really concerning is that it was as a direct result of engaging with the court, the European Court of Human Rights. That was quite clear. And our member organizations in Croatia were subject to the same thing 2 years ago in a case that's now been overturned, but they were directly targeted by the Croatian government for engaging with the European Court of Human Rights. I think we'll leave it there as our presentation of the case, but it's kind of a short introduction and then trying to encapsulate everything in one case. So thanks.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you, Manon.
Okay, thank you very much. So we can open a ton of questions. So we have 15 minutes, and if it's
Actually, we doesn't have an in the QA, but if someone want to speak, I can turn on the mic so they can make the question directly to the guest. Please raise your hand, someone.
Can I make an addition before, maybe while people are getting their thoughts? I really like the flow of like how Greece, Italy, Spain, and back to Greece, and how interconnected the many aspects of what we were talking have been. And Diego, I wanted to make a remark about an important thing that you said, although that you point out, understandably, the important fact that things in Greece are much worse, seemingly. I would still say that I think we're just seeing in these three respective countries different forms of deterrences, where in Greece you do see a deterrence before arrival. In Italy, you see it exactly at the ports where people are being denied after rescue, and in Spain, through this mafiotic criminalization that you're mentioning after their arrival, like they're almost free to go as soon as they arrive. But then there is, I think, the important thing to understand is that these are systemic deterrence policies applied in different geographies due to different methods, but they all came from the same mindset, the same understanding of deterrence policies, with just like different applications. So I find that flow very interesting. And also your statement of like, if everybody's mafia, there's no mafia. It's absolutely true and have been over and over again used. And what a sad coincidence in a way that when we think of the word mafia even, we often go to the idea of like Italian migrants in the United States. So there is also this almost Hollywood sense of connectedness as well, which I think it works from now and then in Italy and Spain much stronger than here.
Yeah, yes, also for me it's very interesting the systematic the systemic, well, it is systemic and systematic, so it's both of them, and also in the sense that, well, migration, irregular migration, the treatment of irregular migrants is below the standards. So I think it's clear, and we have pushbacks that are against European Convention of Human Rights. But for maintain that, it's essential to have to avoid having any kind of people watching so you have to hide that under the carpet. So it's also you have to build a narrative against people, because at the last time are human beings. So the three elements are very linked, because you are vulnerating human rights, you are criminalizing NGO to avoid people to make any kind of testimony of this situation, and you are criminalizing migrants, or you are criminalizing migrants properly, or the migration process. So with these three elements, you can continue this system. The system needs these three elements to maintain these conditions, and we have to fight against, because we're defending human rights, and to defend human rights we need NGOs monitoring what's happening, and we need to treat people with the dignity linked to with the human dignity. No, and this is a very important point.
Actually, we have another one question from Elsa. She said that it's a question to all the hosts. Have you not noticed that if any other European countries have used the criminalization procedures you mentioned in the order to implement them there as well?
As we're obviously spanning a large geographical range, so we're 14 members and 8 of us have been subject as members to criminalization procedures, and that's in Greece, in Croatia, in Hungary, in Serbia, in Bosnia. So it's not limited to these countries. Like the majority of our members have been subject to criminalization, either informal or formal.
Okay. This was the last, I mean, the unique question that someone write.
So we can finish here, no? We have no rest, so we can avoid this last 10 minutes changing that for the rest in the middle of the round table.
Have a hand raised. Sorry.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Go, Maya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this presentation. I have it's kind of general question. It's for the first speaker, Ozan. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. You named the facilitators package in the beginning. From my little understanding of that package, it's supposed to tackle smuggling in the European Union, but isn't this used like basically against, like for discriminalization thing and not actually for the real smugglers, as you were saying? Is that like a good understanding of that package, or is it actually used to tackle the real smugglers, as you were saying, and not for this like criminalization thing?
First of all, you're absolutely right. I was just trying to point out the difference between how the UN Charter operates and how the package that we have spoken about now. The fact that the facilitation with financial or material benefit have been taken out during this package. So the matter is that although it has been implemented in the first place, supposedly to protect migrants from being in the hands of smugglers, it have been eventually evolved into being almost somehow the protector of the smugglers, because smugglers are very well aware of this law, and also to criminalize people on the move themselves. Maybe one parallel thinking of that could be like when you think of why Greece specifically pulled that package out for itself on a later stage. Maybe again, like Lucia, you can maybe give also this parallelity. When you have no territory, international waters almost between Turkey and Greece at the entry points, and like the land slide is very, very close. All of the boats that are arriving, and I mean all of them, to Lesbos are very small, carrying maximum 20 people, as opposed to in Italy, you can find a ship maybe carrying like 130 people, 200 people, because you cannot make that breach with a smaller dinghy. So that's why this law has been implemented in a different way in Greece, because it's able to punish more people. Say, if you have one captain for a ship of 200 people and direct that to 10 ships with like 20 people each. So there is also this hyper legalization problem, that laws that were implemented or amended to protect people and, you know, rightfully punish the others, evolve when it comes to the systemic policies based on deterring migrants, eventually to be implemented against the migrants or people who are in solidarity with migrants or NGO workers or civil society as a whole. And eventually, no matter what happens, also to the citizens of the respective countries. Like you can see a direct correlation between the border violence practices, which I think also the monitoring network did portray, and the rise of narrative change in like the right-wing discourse that is overtaking, or murder rates of police officers are increasing, etc., in different ways. So anyway, I got a bit carried on maybe, but you were absolutely right. At the end of the day, this package, who have been kind of twisted before from the UN Charter, eventually evolved and applied into a punishment form and criminalization tool for people on the move.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, let's take the last one. So Lauren McCone say that what do we know about the pathways to become policymakers to strategize on long-term intervention in this field?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but as at BVMN, we do a lot of work with policymakers. So as people working in the field, to bring data from the field to policymaking forums. So for example, can just go into like a general case example of something that we did with the Schengen Borders Code reform, where they were trying to push through problematic legislation that would allow for pushbacks of asylum seekers essentially within the Schengen zone. We work very hard to lobby MEPs to put forward positions and debates that would actually remove these caveats from the law. So we work very closely with policymakers to bring them the data and facts that are necessary from the field for them to argue in the policy arenas. And sometimes it works. So that's work that we do as advocacy officers in the network.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we can finish here the tonight lessons. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you very much.
For accepting our
Thank you.
invitation.